Welcome to AskPsychSessions with Marianne Lloyd, where we ask some of the best teachers we know questions from you, our audience. If you have a question or an idea for a conversation, please visit bit.ly/AskPsychSessions. That's bit.ly/AskPsychSessions. All one word, all lowercase. And here's our next question.
Thank you for joining us today. My guest is Dr. Shivon Robinson from Williams College. Welcome, Shivon. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, as always, before we jump into our topic, could you tell the listeners about you? What is your research background? What are you teaching? How long have you been at Williams? Give people some context, please.
Sure. So my research background is that I like to say, a behavioral neuropharmacologist. So I am interested in how drugs influence behavior broadly. And this is a topic that I've been interested in for a long time. So I actually did my undergraduate work at Williams. So this is a very full circle moment for me for being faculty at Williams. But I first got introduced to neuroscience as a first year at Williams, where I worked in Betty Zimmerberg's lab studying how different environmental and genetic factors influence anxiety-like behavior in rats. And that really spurred my interest in studying behavior and the neural mechanisms that underlie it. And from Williams, I ended up doing my graduate training at the University of Pennsylvania, where I continued to work in kind of the neuropsychiatry space. So looking at different drugs for the treatment of anxiety and depression, and developing animal models to better understand how those drugs work. You know, funny enough, they've been around for 50 odd years, and we still don't have a great understanding how many antidepressants and anxiolytic drugs actually work. So that was really exciting. And then I stayed at Penn to do my postdoc work, and that's where I transitioned into studying more drugs of abuse, so opioids in particular, and understanding how early life exposure to those drugs impact development and long-term outcomes.
Great. Certainly highly relevant work right now with a lot of practical applications. And what are you teaching these days?
Yeah, so I actually teach quite a few different courses. So I am in the psychology department at Williams, but we also have a neuroscience concentration, which is similar to a minor at other institutions. So I end up teaching courses that kind of bridge the line between psych and neuro. So I teach intro neuroscience. I've taught senior seminars within the neuroscience concentration, studying how stress impacts the nervous system at different levels. And I also teach a course on the neuroscience of opioids. So how do they work on a cellular molecular level, and how have these drugs impact the reward system to lead to substance use disorders and addiction? And that's been a really, obviously, relevant course to teach right now, but also, I think, really exciting to get students talking about this topic from a perspective of how we can use science and empirical methods to address this crisis.
Great. So one of the reasons that I wanted to have you as a guest is that if I were to, do a frequency distribution of the types of psychologists that are on here, I talk to far fewer behavioral neuropharmacologists. You're definitely the first one there, but anyone in that kind of biopsych space, far fewer. So let's talk a little bit about teaching those courses. And you can talk about whichever your courses or many courses, but just first of all, I think for some students in a psych major, this may not be, your results may not be typical, right? First year student falls in love doing neuroscience research. So do you get some students with a little bit of resistance or hesitancy, and kind of how do you work with that?
Yeah. You mean in terms of signing up for this class, or just in general?
Just like a general, like not so sure about the super brainy, sciencey, maybe sort of the stats vibe that sometimes people are like, I don't know about this brainy psych stuff. But I like the helping stuff.
Yeah. And I think what's really great about our neuroscience concentration is that we end up getting students who are from lots of different majors. So they don't have to be a psychology major or a biology major. I've even had students who were econ majors, philosophy majors, who were just really excited about studying the brain. So I think one of the things that we try to do, at least in our intro courses, is to give a really broad overview of what neuroscience entails. Students might come in with preconceptions of, it is very brainy or maybe very bio-heavy, but we do really try to highlight how interdisciplinary neuroscience is, and that we are excited to have students coming from different backgrounds and different interests and showing it, getting excited about studying the brain. And it could be at a very molecular level. We have students who just really are excited about talking about action potentials, or kind of the microscopic aspects of neuroscience. And then there's some students who really enjoy zooming out and talking circuit level, systems level. How is the brain contributing to these different physiological and behavioral effects? So just by kind of laying out this trajectory of how our neuroscience concentration works, after taking the intro neuro class, students can take electives that are offered either through bio or psych, or sometimes even other departments, and they can kind of self-select how they want to navigate this concentration. And I think that offers the opportunity for students to, if they want, step outside the box, try something different, or something that they might have been a little nervous about trying, and just giving them the opportunity to experience that. Or, if they know kind of how they want to navigate this concentration, if they know, like me, I was really interested in neuropharmacology, trying to get the courses that will give them that experience. So it's nice that we have that flexibility. And I think that allows us to get students who have a range of interest within the field of neuro.
Great. Thank you. Right. That idea of flexibility. I'm listening, right? We're having early conversations in our department, and we might want to look into some neuroscience options to offer. So I think that that's a good reminder, right? That it's not my mind, of course, has one viewpoint, but it is a much bigger field than I recognize sometimes. Maybe we can talk a little bit about that opioid course. That sounds really interesting. And I'm just going to guess that that class sounds like it sort of is a broad class, that you're not just doing kind of the neuropsychopharmacology training part that you have, but I'm guessing you also delve into maybe more of almost like maybe even sociology kind of pieces. So any advice for faculty that are kind of wanting to step outside of maybe what the specific courses they took in grad school are, kind of how did you approach it? Any tips other than just go for it? You know how to read and learn things, right? You didn't know anything when you started your grad program, and you figured that out. So you can figure this out too. But yeah, sort of what was that process like, and what advice do you have?
Sure. Yeah. So this course actually started off as a collaboration. So while I was at Penn, I actually did a teaching postdoc. So in addition to my traditional research, I was also teaching at different neighboring institutions, developing my own course, getting some experience with college level teaching, because I knew that I wanted to come back to a liberal arts school. So while I was there, I worked with a colleague, Nathan Freed, who's now at Rutgers Camden, and we were talking about, his research. He focused more on pain, so the neurobiology of pain, animal models of pain, and I was coming in with this work looking at kind of the neurobiology of addiction, and we were like, wouldn't it be great if we kind of bridge those two ideas together? And it made sense to design something around the opioids epidemic, since this current crisis that we're in has been fueled so much by kind of the pharmaceutical companies' role and the medical world's role in overprescribing opioids to treat chronic pain. So it just seemed like a natural collaboration. So that's where the idea for the course originally came from. And we ended up tweaking it. And when I came to Williams, one of the things that I thought a lot about was, as you mentioned, kind of your traditional pharmacology or neuropharmacology course. One tends to, I think, take a broad approach in terms of you cover a lot of different classes of drugs, right? So you got your hallucinogens, your depressants, your stimulants, which I think is a great survey type of course just to get students introduced to, here are all the, common mechanisms of different commonly used drugs. But I wanted to take the time to really have students understand the mechanism of opioids, but integrate that with the larger societal issue that we're dealing with now. So it is very much a neuroscience course. We talk about, as I mentioned, the molecular and cellular mechanisms of opioids. We talk about how both endogenous opioids and exogenous opioids like heroin, fentanyl, how they interact with these circuitries that code for pain and reward. And we build on that to get to a point where the students are understanding the mechanisms that contribute to things like substance use disorders or chronic pain. And that was important to me because, for one, like I said, it's a neuro class, so I want to make sure that they're understanding those concepts. But to then talk about, where do we go from here? That's another thing that I thought was missing from pharmacology courses. You kind of leave the course memorizing, this drug interacts with this receptor. But at least in my experience, I never felt like I knew what should be done afterwards. Maybe we talked briefly about potential treatments, but it felt like the role of the scientist and the role of, a lay person or the role of a family or a friend who knows someone who suffers from a substance use disorder. They never felt connected to me. And that was something I wanted to incorporate in this class. So in terms of how does one prepare for a class like this, I don't have a background in sociology or public health, but as you mentioned, I can read. I can reach out to people. So I have some colleagues who are in the public health space. I reached out to some community organizations that do work with individuals who have substance use disorders or their families or just concerned community members to just get a sense of, particularly in our community, kind of what is the state of the opioid crisis? How is it impacting people? Massachusetts in particular was hit pretty bad. And the area that I'm in had some of the worst overdose rates. So I, invited some of these community members to come into the class early on in the semester just to kind of provide that perspective of, when we talk about these topics, it can feel very removed from what the actual situation is. But here are some people who are actually on the ground. They're seeing, kind of how this is impacting our community, and it's important to keep them in mind. I think it was also helpful to hear from these community members and people who are in the public health space about what they feel are the most pressing issues. So me as a neuroscientist and as someone who spent a lot of time in this field and, thinking about the questions that neuroscientists have from a basic science perspective, clearly that's important and that's what motivates me to do my work. But that's not necessarily the same questions that people who, as I said, are on the ground have. So they brought up some really interesting ideas about, kind of what impact has this brain disease model of addiction, which I'd say is the most well-cited or most well-accepted within the field, versus how do people within the community think about the underlying causes of addiction. And a lot of the time, those conversations steer more to what I would refer to as a sociological, ecological framework, right? So things like having access to treatment, insurance, educational programs, all of these things that we typically don't talk about in neuroscience. But I think for these students, it's important for them to get at least exposure to that. And they can at least have an idea of what the resources are outside of what I'm teaching them if they want to pursue this further. So I've loved teaching this class. I think each time I teach it, I learn something new. And also, the science is adapting, it's changing. It's been fun for me to keep up with that literature that's, the more sociological, epidemiology type of work, in addition to the cool neuro stuff that's happening in terms of understanding mechanisms underlying addiction and substance use disorders. And in terms of the coursework, I think sometimes there's a concern that if you veer too much outside of the curriculum, there's a fear that you might lose content. And I don't think that's been the case. I feel like the students that come out of my course have the content down. And what's exciting is that they can use that information to be more informed, viewers, I think, of kind of what's happening in the real world. So, for example, I've had students after my class send me news articles about we just saw that our county just introduced these naloxone administration boxes, or we saw that a supervised injection site opened up in this place, and I'm really interested in what that means for this community, and just being able to think critically about these ideas and these concepts, being able to speak to misinformation or at least identify it. I think in addition to the content, these are all really important skills that they get out of this. And it's nice to just have it packaged into one course.
And have it be with what you've been excited about since your first year as a student, right? I mean, that is lovely to be able to have that all together. Great. Well, I try to always save time for my guests to talk about something that is also meaningful and important to them and that maybe I did not draw out. So is there anything you want to talk about, whether it's about ending up teaching at where you went to undergrad, if it's about, I know that you're an undergrad only program, so, running an effective laboratory while teaching intensely, if it's about how senior faculty can be more supportive. And so the floor is yours, Shivon.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, so many good things. I think I'll speak a little bit about Williams as an undergrad only institution. Well, primarily undergrad institution. We do have a master's program, but they're in art history and economics. And so I think a common misconception that I get when I'm at conferences or just kind of outside of my institution is when I say, I teach at a primarily undergraduate institution, people are like, oh, so you don't really have time for research or you don't really do research. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. I do a lot of research. I have an undergrad only run lab. And I think, it's an interesting experience that I don't know if you're really trained for in your typical postdoc experience. Again, I just want to highlight that this program I was in really allowed me to get some of that experience beforehand, which I think was a huge help. But it's rewarding and challenging in its own unique ways. I think one of the biggest challenges and something that I just went through is I had students that were working in my lab when I first started here at Williams. I'm going into my 5th year. And that cohort of students just graduated last year. And so, I'm sure at R1, people have similar experiences with grad students leaving and kind of having a new wave of students coming in. but it does hurt when you feel like all of that information and skill just graduated and now I have to do it all over again. But, the rewarding part is being able to see the growth of my students over those 4 years. And I can't help but see myself in a lot of them, right? Starting off early and this might be one of their first research experiences and getting them excited about it and giving them the independence to be in the lab and ask questions that they're interested in, have the opportunity to test things out and fail in a way that's supportive, right? Like low stakes situation for them, I think is really, it's a unique experience. And so I feel very lucky to work somewhere like Williams, where we do have the support and resources to be able to have students come into the lab and work on projects with us, be co-authors on papers, on posters. And a lot of the students that I work with, I mean, not all of them want to go to grad school, but those who do, I think, are incredibly prepared for it just because they've had such close interactions with their professors, and oftentimes they are like the primary person running an experiment in the lab. And for some students who are at bigger institutions, they don't have the opportunity to do that. So I think it's a really awesome job. Obviously, I came back, so it was something I wanted to do. But I do feel very grateful that I get to continue doing research, but also be at a school that really appreciates excellent teaching and wants to support their faculty to be able to do that.
All right, fantastic, good. And I would predict, right, if people have a question about what life is like, you might be willing to answer that email. Not day of, because I know that you have an abundant life, right? I think that is a bit of a trick. People think you don't have time for research. It's like, well, I need to take time for a lot of teaching and a lot of research, right? I mean, the best and a lot of both worlds.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, great. Thank you so much. I've been chatting today with Dr. Shivon Robinson from Williams College. Listeners, did today's episode make you realize you have a question you would like someone to answer? I would be happy to take it into consideration and find a guest that can help. But what I need you to do is head over to our Google form at bit.ly/AskPsychSessions.